Hey guys, this is your girl Lira, and you're listening to Self-Reflection Podcast. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Self-Reflection Podcast. I pray and I hope that this conversation is going to find you in a great light. And if you're not doing your best today, I want to encourage you in this moment to go ahead and create a moment for self-reflection. Like always, I am always going to encourage us to find some time for ourselves because I have found self-reflection to be one of those things that have allowed me to find inner peace for myself. It has allowed me to find stability when there's chaos in my life. So I want to encourage you in this moment, if you are going through a challenging time right now, whether if it's you dealing with your mental health, finance, family, relationship, work, right? Create some time for self-reflection. Oftentimes when we sit in silence, we get that answer just comes out of nowhere, wherever it comes from. It oftentimes finds us. Thank you again so much for joining us on Self-Reflection Podcast. And before we move into our conversation, I want to ask you, if you have yet to subscribe to Self-Reflection Podcast, please go ahead and hit that subscription button as we seek to continue to grow the podcast here. Every subscribe, every like means a lot to us as we try to grow our community here. Today, we're going to be talking to Jonathan. Jonathan is the author of Finding Peace of Mind. Please help me welcome Jonathan. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on your show. Greatly appreciated.
Yes, thank you again for being patient with me. As we go back and forward, finding the right time for you to come on the podcast. I appreciate your patience there. Please, before we get into our conversation, can you give our family here on Self-Reflection Podcast a brief bio about yourself?
Yes, so recently I started, in the last couple of years, being much more open about my experience with mental health and neurodiversity. And the culmination of that is the book I've just written, Finding Peace of Mind, which comes out on the 10th of October. And what I've decided to do is all profits from that book will go to mental health charities for the first year. So that makes me feel much more comfortable about promoting it, and there's no financial gain. So the book talks about my experience specifically with bipolar disorder and depression and addiction. And in terms of neurodiversity, I have dyslexia, and they've affected me all my life. Certainly the bipolar disorder, the depression and the dyslexia started in my certainly around 6 to 8 mark. And probably what makes my story a little bit unusual in that I didn't actually get diagnosed with mental health issues for another 30 years. So it was in my late 30s that I was first of all diagnosed with depression, and then it was a couple of years later that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that's not actually uncommon for people with bipolar disorder. And dyslexia, I had to wait another 10 years. So it was 40 years later that I went to get myself formally tested for dyslexia, and I have dyslexia. So I have a long history of trying to figure things out myself. Doing things like you talked with your family at the beginning about self-reflection. I've analyzed myself into my tummy button. But actually, I was thinking as you were speaking, now that my medication has been sorted out again recently, in the last couple of years, self-reflection actually is really powerful and greatly enhances my day-to-day quality. So, for example, I don't always do it, but I know if I do, I try and aim for 20 minutes worth of meditation. My day just seems a bit more steady. writing a plan for the day, which I think is another form of self-reflection. I find enormously helpful because otherwise things are just spinning around in my mind. And when I've got a plan, I can then focus on one thing at a time. And the other thing that helps me, I was thinking about self-reflection again, is I'm very, very good at giving myself a really hard time, for being useless and not achieving enough and and so it goes on. And now I've got a really effective way of interrupting it. So what I do now is I interrupt it with a question. And the question is, can I try my best for today? Because that's all I can do. And I know I can do that for the most part. And that quietens that voice in my head that I'm not doing enough, haven't achieved enough, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Thank you for that background. Some of the things you touch on there, depression, bipolar, is some of the things we are going to talk on in our conversation. But as you were talking with that inner critic voice, right? It reminded me of the podcast episode that is going to be released a week before yours, which is today. And my guest Marsha, right, wrote a animated short film, and it was about that self-critic voice where she had to battle with that as well. And I've come to find out that many people also go through that struggle, right? And sometimes it's just as finding a small tool as what you just said, asking yourself a question to interrupt that voice, to give it less power than we usually do. So thank you again for sharing that part of your journey. I know you worked in the law enforcement, right? How was your mental health challenge in that space?
So I was a police officer in London for nearly 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time I was working in uniform. And then after I got promoted to sergeant, I sort of did a few administrative type roles, as well as supervising younger constables. And one of the reasons I joined the police, I left school with poor exam results, worked in restaurants, worked on building sites. I actually worked they call them jackaroos, a jackaroo in the Australian outback, which is the American equivalent as a cowboy. Mm. And I did that for a year and then came back, trained as a bricklayer, and then joined the police. And the reason I joined the police, it was a sort of very conscious decision. I was thinking, because I'd sort of at school, I'd rebelled. I came out with poor results. I didn't care. But by the time a couple of years later, I really wanted to try and turn my life around. And I thought, okay, I'm going to join the police. Initially, I was thinking for about 2-3 years. And rather than fight the system, I'm going to just really try my best. And I wasn't aware at that point that I had mental health issues. I knew that there was something seriously wrong with me, but I hadn't made the connection of that something seriously wrong is something to do with mental health. Yeah. And I think back then, so this is talking about the early 80s, 1980s, mental health wasn't really talked about at all. Neurodiversity wasn't talked about either. And so with the benefit of hindsight, being in the police really helped me because it gave me structure. So, you have to be at a certain place at a certain time. You're expected to do certain things. And that imposed a structure on a sort of daily, weekly basis, which helped me sort of move forward and sort of do the best I could. And what I did notice was that we used to have what we call long weekends. So we'd have was it 3.5 days off, or maybe 3.5 days off, I think, every month. And by the end of the long weekend, my brain was just completely fried. It was all over the place, and I was consciously aware. I couldn't understand why this was happening, that I needed to get back to work to sort it out. But what I discovered was that work, in terms of the things that were going wrong in my head, which, as I say, I didn't understand. What I discovered eventually, and it was after I left the police actually, and I started working in shipping, I realized that actually work isn't a solution to what's going on inside my head. Whereas initially I hoped the police would help me, and then it became the source of why it wasn't helping me. And then I went through exactly the same process when I was in shipping, and then I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, it's got absolutely nothing to do with work whatsoever.
Yeah. And I think many people struggle with that space, right? Because I think that's something that I also too struggle with, where, I found myself going through this challenge with myself where I felt like my mental health was struggling. And I also thought it was work, right? And I felt I was a hamster on a wheel, just going, going, going. And once I recognized that, there's more to what was going on with me, and this is after I took some time off work. I'm like, okay, that really didn't have anything to do with work, right? But I really connected it to work. However, many people struggle with their mental health when it comes down to working, and finding balance with relationships, right? So how does finding inner peace connects with our mental health?
Good question. For me, it's been a long process.
Mhm.
There was something you said about the impacts of work. So one of the things that I realized, this was after about 3-4 years, that working shift work was really punishing, from sort of mental well-being point of view. I did shift work on and off for about 7 years. So I think, again, with the benefit of hindsight, the type of work you do can it affect, your daily well-being for
Yeah.
certain. So it's the type of work, the type of hours you work, and you talked about, working long hours. So I was always, whatever I was doing, I actually had an objective after I left school. I remember sitting in my bed one evening thinking, there is something seriously wrong with me. And I decided that I was psychotic, which, without really knowing what psychotic was. But one feature of me trying to figure it all out myself was that I thought it was something external to me that was wrong. And so when I was in the police, in addition to being a police officer, I always had other things on the go. I sort of renovated a property, got heavily involved in the stock market. And I was always searching for something that would give me that peace of mind. And actually, during COVID, I thought this is going to be really easy. I know what feeling, terrible feels like. This should be, I don't know if you know the expression, a doddle. Use that expression?
No.
Right. A doddle is, I don't know where it comes from, but this should be, a doddle means this should be super easy. And it was a nightmare. And what I hadn't understood was the importance of community and the importance of just being around people, not even necessarily talking, but just being around people. And I really struggled. I had 3 or 4 bipolar highs and then crashes in a period of about 1.5 to 2 years. And when I eventually reached out again to my doctor and said, I'm on my way out here. I'm not sure how much longer I can put up with this. She referred me to a psychiatrist who then changed my medications, because I've been on the same medications for about 20 years. They stopped working long ago. And there was a settling in period. So it took about 4-5 months to settle in. And then coming back to this thing of peace of mind, it was just like a miracle. It wasn't an effort to think. It wasn't an effort to breathe. It wasn't an effort to work. I could walk down the streets and just sort of feel the sunshine on my face. There was no interference in my brain. It wasn't an effort just to focus or to think or to listen. And yeah, it was just like a complete miracle. And the only thing, so during COVID, I tried all sorts of things to self-regulate. The meditation, the list making, the monitoring of moods, all sorts of things. And the only difference this time was that I'd taken medication, specifically a mood stabilizer for the bipolar and an antidepressant to lift up from the depression.
Yeah.
And the most bizarre thing for me was that it wasn't an effort. It was just, well, and it's more or less been that way for 2.5 years.
Can you describe a little bit more of like the feelings that you were feeling when you were feeling depression, and what does bipolar look like for you?
Okay. So to go with the depression first, depression to me, it feels like there's just a grey mist. Not literally, but it's there, and it's a prism through which I see everything. So getting up in the morning can be a real effort. Forcing myself to have breakfast is an effort. Sitting down, writing the list of things to do during the day is an effort. And it's like walking through sludge, carrying a heavy weight or dragging a heavy weight behind you. And what I discovered during COVID was if I could just keep going, sometime between probably 12 to 2 o'clock, the mist would sort of lift a bit in my brain and I'd get some clarity. Wouldn't always happen, but I'd be back to square one the following day. And it's exhausting. I just felt tired the whole time. Sleep, I was about to say didn't help. Well, it must have helped, but it didn't actually solve this feeling of just feeling exhausted the whole time. Certainly from my experience, it's not something you can snap out of. It's like, an analogy for me would be if I had twisted a ligament in my leg, I can't think that ligament better. And in the same way, I can't think myself out of depression. And I've tried. Bipolar is a different beast. And there are 3 types of bipolar. And funny enough, I'd been diagnosed in my early 40s, and it was only 20 years later, I actually bought some books on bipolar because I was really struggling. And it was only 20 years later I actually realized, or I'd probably been told, but I'd forgotten what type of bipolar I have. And actually that's really important. So there's bipolar type 1 so bipolar is a faulty mood regulator. So your moods are going like this and you have no control over it. And so for people with bipolar type 1, when they go up, they go into what they call mania. So that means you go past a point of sort of excessive energy, excessive everything, and you hit mania. And at that point, you start hearing voices, you start seeing things, you start believing you might be somebody, of importance. You might be on a mission from the gods, and in your head, you don't actually see there's anything wrong. This is total reality for you. And the only effective way, or that I know of, for people when they go into mania is to be hospitalized, have the correct medication to bring them down to a sort of medium point, and then released back out to carry on. Get ideally with help of a therapist or a psychiatrist, etc., etc. I have bipolar type 2, which means I still have these mood swings, but I have what they call hypermania rather than mania, which means I'll go right up, but everything is just really fast. and really intense. And I didn't really, and so when I was reading books about bipolar, and there was one book by an American psychiatrist, and he described in detail different types of hypomania.
Yeah.
And this was only 3 or so years ago. And my jaw dropped to the floor. And I thought, oh my God, I do all of those things. And so it's like hypomanic planning, hypomanic organizing, hypomanic analysis, spending money, big projects, taking risks. And I was just thinking, oh, tick, 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 tick. And I had no idea. And so what happens is with the bipolar type 2, for me, I have 2 types. One, I can have a very short high and a crash. But since taking medication more, they were like it was very long. Sometimes it'd be like 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And it'd be gradually I'd be getting more and more intense. And it was usually around projects, work projects. And when I was like set on something, I'm like a laser light, and I'll ignore everything around what people are saying, and I'll just keep going. And I'll keep going until the stress becomes so much that I then have what they call a bipolar crash. And when I have the crash, I'll come down within 24 hours. And for the first 2 weeks, it's an effort just to move. It's like my brain has been completely removed. I've got this sandstorm going around inside my head, clattering against my skull. And I know it will never end. Between 4 to 6 weeks, I will come out of it. But even though I've gone through this maybe 20 plus times, when it actually happens, each time it's like the first time it's ever happened. And each time I know beyond any shadow of doubt, it will never finish. And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And then there's another type of bipolar, which they call, I think it's cyclothymia. And what that happens is that you can experience these highs and these lows almost simultaneously. And that is, listening to people who've had it, fortunately, I don't think I've got it. It's exhausting.
Yeah, thank you so much for that description there, because sometimes, right, we could be going through our challenges and we don't really know what's going on. And to hear somebody else, describe what they have gone through, it could help us, right? Like you said, you didn't get your first diagnosed or check until you were 39, somewhere around there. So, to be able to hear you explain it in that way, it meant a lot. And I hope that whoever's listening to this conversation, right, if you find yourself in that space, right, reach out to someone, go get checked, talk to your doctor, right, talk to a psychiatrist, talk to a coach, but get some support in that space, because sometimes it could feel heavy, right? It could feel as if you're the only one that is going through it when it's happening in that moment. So I want to continue to support us and encourage us in this moment to seek external support if we feel as if we cannot carry the load by ourselves. And that's why I find self-reflection really helpful, because I know that sometimes when I go through my own challenges, right, sitting with myself, reflecting allows me to know I cannot handle the struggles that I'm going through by myself. So I need to talk to somebody else. Again, thank you so much, Jonathan, for that explanation there. We're going to move into the next part of our conversation. Is you were born in privilege, right? How did that contradict with your mental health struggles?
Could I just take one step back to what you were talking about? I completely agree with you. If there's something wrong with the brain and it's happening, for longer than a week or a couple of weeks, I would really recommend, as you said, going to see a doctor. And I flatly refuse to do so because I saw it as a weakness. I saw that it was because I wasn't strong-willed enough, because I hadn't found a solution. But the interesting thing is, and then when it came to medication, I refused to take medication. I didn't want to be addicted. Yeah, I was quite happy to drink myself into a stupor in my early 20s. I stopped drinking when I was 21. But I applied two sets of rules. I applied one set of rules to my brain and a second set of rules to the rest of my body, my nose, my ears, my eyes. I went partially blind almost overnight. I had a bleeding in the back of my eye. And within 2 or 3 days, I went to see the doctor. When I've injured my back, I'll go and see the doctor. So I was prepared to see the doctor about almost every part of my body except for my brain.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect with the rest of my body to be able to solve it through my own mind and my own thinking. Yet with my brain, which is probably the most complex part of my body, I expected to be able to think myself better. And it was when I sort of made the comparison with physical illness, physical injuries and illnesses, I could see the sort of irrationality behind it.
Yeah.
So yes, my recommendation is, speak to people who you think will understand, and to seek professional medical help, as you would, if I'm trying to think of an example, twisted your ankle and it wasn't getting better. So yes, I was lucky. I was born into privilege. I have a hereditary title. We have this thing of titles in the UK. And my family, historically, they'd been in the woolen business. They'd been really successful in the 1850s to about 1950. And so in many ways, my future was sort of determined. At some point I was going to inherit the family title. I would inherit the estate that my grandparents lived on, and I would be expected to, or it was expected that I would go and sit in the House of Lords as a lord, and do service for the country. So it was intermingled with very privileged upbringing and also a very sort of Victorian view on life and world and what you should be doing. And I think it wouldn't have mattered what sort of background I had. I think the result would have been the same. So I felt completely disjointed from the people around me. I felt I didn't belong. I knew there was something wrong. And this is like age 6, 7. And going back to the physical analogy, if someone's got like broken leg, then at least they know they've got a broken leg. I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And that just continued. I think what added another layer of complexity is that I have dyslexia, which wasn't diagnosed for another, oh my goodness, 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bad. Wasn't diagnosed for another 40 years. So I think the plan would have been that I would have gone to, a very sort of top of the range private school, and I would have gone on to Oxford or Cambridge, and then maybe joined the army or something along those sort of lines, or gone into the city. And I found quite quickly that I had real difficulty studying. So actually, when it came to, I was age 12, 13, and it came to take my exams for the next boarding school, and I was supposed to go to Eton, which is like, considered one of the top private schools. I knew I wouldn't pass. I knew that there was absolutely zero chance of me passing. And I think I was one of the few people who didn't pass that, and get into the school of their choice. And I went to another one, which actually I was much better suited to. But again, once I went to my next school, the dyslexia kicked in. And so I left school with poor results. I did retakes and still had poor results. So unlike most of the people that I was at school with, I didn't go to university at the time. And as I mentioned before, I sort of did a lot of physical type jobs, because those were doing a physical job, I could see an end result. And also, I think intuitively, I went for physical type jobs because it didn't require me to use English or use maths, which was problematic with the dyslexia. So from my experience, you sometimes read about people who, extremely wealthy and they've got depression, and people say, oh, it's just like I can't remember what the expressions are, but they're not very nice expressions. The suggestion is that, what have you got to moan about? But it's exactly the same thing. Is, you could have as much money as you could imagine, but if you've got chronic diabetes, it's going to affect you the same way as someone who hasn't got any money, and you'll have the same impacts potentially. You might be able to get slightly better care, but you have the same illness and it'll have the same impacts. And that's the same with mental health, whether it's depression, it's bipolar, or it's neurodiversity, ADHD. All of these things will have a substantial impact on your life, which you cannot control on your own unless you get professional help.
Correct. Thank you again so much for that answer. For so many people, right, a lot of us are high functioning, even when we are sad, depressed, even something as severe as having bipolar, right? We somewhat keep going because that's what society demands of us, right? It's not as if, you take a break here and life stops for you, right? Life continues to go. How can people with high functioning, either some type of depression or some type of mental health, right? How can they start to realize that in themselves, that they might be struggling with their mental health, even though they are high functioning?
So I would put myself in the high functioning category. So for the most part, I've always been able to work. I was in law enforcement for 12 years. I've run my own business for 20 plus years. I've developed a note-taking technique which really helps people listen and concentrate. And actually, anybody who buys the book, there's free access to the note-taking technique course that I've developed online. Again, they're exactly the same thing. I want to be able to free to talk about it and not worry that people are thinking, oh, well, you're only talking about it because you want to sort of earn money later on. So actually, there's an access code and you can get the online training for free. And I've always never been dissatisfied. So I got into photography for a bit, and I thought I might become a freelance photojournalist. Yeah, I've always gone off on tangents, but I think one knows within oneself, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but if you're waking up in the morning, and you've got a fear, you've got a dread, everything's an effort. If your behavior is such, you're doing things and you think afterwards, why did I do that? If you've got an addictive personality, you're drinking too much or you're taking substances, I think even if one is high functioning, one knows within oneself there's something not quite right. And a bit like getting a body checkup. I would recommend, getting a brain checkup, because I never actually knew what peace of mind was. And that's the reason why I titled the book Finding Peace of Mind. Probably I've never really truly known it until I started getting help. And I experienced it on and off once I'd been diagnosed. I had quite long periods of feeling peace of mind. And then when I had a medication change about a couple of years ago, the last 2 years, like a miracle. I don't have to do anything to feel comfortable in myself.
Mm-hmm.
As I think about it, probably quite a good description, in that I always thought I needed to be doing something to be able to feel better. Whereas now I don't need to do anything to feel comfortable within myself.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the turning point in your life that led to you going to seek a professional help?
So there were sort of two, well, maybe three major turning points, but they were all more or less the same thing. So the first one was in my late 30s. I'd been in a bad state for a few years. And I just reached a rock bottom. I just thought, I can't do this anymore. In my own mind, I tried everything that I thought would make a difference, doing well in my job, doing postgraduate studies and doing really well, making money, relationships. I tried sort of self-help groups, gurus, religion, and a few other more weirder things on the weird spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached a point, I thought, I knew there was nothing else. And for me, it's always taken me to the point where something new's got to happen, or I'm going to call it a day. And that was what happened when I first saw a therapist. And I remember even agreeing to see one and going to the door. I felt completely humiliated that I'd not been able to work this out myself. Again, a totally irrational thought, which I didn't apply to the rest of my body. Another sort of turning point, exactly the same, a sort of fork in the road, was in my early 40s, where I'd been on an antidepressant by this point for about a year, but I was still at points really struggling. And I just reached that point of exhaustion where I just didn't have it in me to carry on. And I actually got a bank loan and went to a psychiatric specialist center in the US, because I'd heard that the US was more advanced and further on in terms of understanding about mental health than we were than some of the places in the UK. And then the last turning point, exactly the same, was during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the fourth high and crash. And during the crash, I just thought, I've had enough of this. I've been putting up with this for 50 plus years. I haven't got the willpower or the inclination to carry on. And anything sort of holding me back was no longer becoming a valid reason. And I knew I was in serious trouble. And so again, it was that fork in the road. Either I call it a day or I go and get help. So I have to really be pushed to that fork in the road. I say I have to be pushed. I would like to think now that actually I'm not going to wait, and I'm now much more willing to go and get help, much sooner. And people, God, we wouldn't accept, or I wouldn't have accepted, the level of discomfort and the level of malfunctioning in any part of my body that I was having in my brain. So, I mean, my message would be, don't wait 20 years or 30 years. If you think there's something wrong, try and get professional help. And if you can't, and I know the medical system in the US is different to in the UK, so we have free medical help. And although it's a bit of a struggle, it's not a, it's there's still a bias towards physical help as opposed to mental help in the UK, but that help does exist. You might have to just fight a little bit harder, but I know in the US it's a very different paradigm. So we have charities in the UK where you can get a lot of information, and there are certain charities, so I imagine it might be the same in the US, where you can get help from volunteers. But my goodness, it's worth doing. So if you're high functioning, actually, you can function even better once your brain's sorted.
Absolutely. Thank you again for that. In this moment, I want to remind us, if you have yet to subscribe to Self-Reflection Podcast, please go ahead and hit that subscription button as we continue to grow our community here on Self-Reflection, so we can continue to have conversations like this, bringing awareness to mental health, right? It's something that is needed in our society, not only from an individual perspective, but from a collective perspective as well. Because I think that, from my understanding, I think that the more healthy we are as a society, the better our communities are, globally. So again, if you have yet to subscribe to this platform, please go ahead and hit the subscription button. That will mean a lot to us. We are almost coming to the end of our conversation here, and I have a couple more questions for you. One of the questions that I have here is, how has self-awareness changed your life, and what are some of the 14 personal foundations you have developed for resilience?
I think self-reflection for me has been invaluable. So, for example, I was actually, in the end, I was disinherited by my father, which was quite a tough experience. But through self-reflection, I decided to reframe it. And how I reframed it in my own mind was that my inheritance became my disinheritance.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I was disinherited, that actually freed me to do or be whatever I wanted, as opposed to something I thought I should be doing.
Yeah.
And that self-reflection in that respect, it was life-changing. And the outcome of which has been that book. Then another thing, again, actually a lot of it was during COVID, because I was really struggling. So I was actually writing down what my thinking was and what were the phrases that I was using. And I was quite shocked that every day I'd be saying the same thing: you're useless, I hate you, you're no good.
Mm-hmm.
And you failed, you're not making the most of today. I was obsessed by making the most of each day, so getting up early, starting straight away. And again, through self-reflection, one of the things I came up with was, let's say 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I start thinking, oh God, I haven't done anything today, I haven't achieved enough, or I'd have been working all day, but not on the thing that I really thought I should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I came up with, again, another thought, which initially I wrote down, and then I learned it, and it's really simple. And the thought to interrupt this sort of really negative chatter was, I can start my day again at any time. And it could be 4 in the afternoon, could be 6 in the evening, could be 9 at night. And that it just changes everything. And it completely negates that negative thinking. It takes out the sort of juice from the thinking. Yes, you mentioned about the foundations. I realized, again, during COVID, that whether I was getting help or not, there were certain things that if I did them on a daily basis, they would help me. They wouldn't solve my mental illnesses, but what they would do would put me in a good position as and when that things did come right, I would benefit from, but also they wouldn't further aggravate all the troubles I was having. They're really simple. Like one was just getting good sleep. So actually, number one is sleep. Aiming for, well, for me, it's 8 to 8.5 hours sleep a night if I can. Another one for me is community and friends. So rather than working in my where I live, I'll go out to a coffee shop in the morning, and then I go to another coffee shop in the afternoon. I always go to the same ones, and it's about building community. Another foundation that actually really helped me when I was struggling, and I use now, every day, is mindfulness. So sometimes, if I'm feeling panic or I've got I just feel slightly ill at ease, and I could be sitting or I could be walking along the street, and I'll focus on my breathing, just breathing through my nose, breathing out through my nose. Or I might focus on my walking, my heel hitting the ground, my foot rocking forward, springing off my toes. And again, that I find really helpful. And actually another thing that I decided to do, so for me, and I think this is probably very relevant for high functioning people, I was obsessed by wealth and success. And a big turnaround for me was about 3 years ago, and I suddenly realized I can actually determine what wealth is for me. It doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be prestige or anything else. And so I decided that my wealth was my knowledge and experience with mental health and neurodiversity. 30 years of trying to do it myself, and then 20 years of getting professional help. And that made a huge difference. And, that idea of wealth would probably be different for everyone. And then for success, the old Jonathan, it would be selling 20,000 books or 100,000 books.
Mm.
And for me, success is just to do my best to put my knowledge in the public sphere to benefit others. And what I've decided to do, I say with a little smile on my face, is that I'm going to do a 7-month charity walk around the whole of the United Kingdom and Ireland. And again, all money will be going to mental health charities. Any money from talks will be going to mental health charities. And I'm going to start in the north of Scotland on the 1st of January. So it's going to be a little bit cold and a little bit windy, but that's what mental health is about. It can be really tough at times, and it's sort of putting one foot in front of the other.
Absolutely. Thank you again for that. When people read your book, what do you want them to get out of it? And again, the book is Finding Peace of Mind.
What I'd like is for it, I suppose there are a few things. So sort of people who'd be interested, people who have mental health challenges or neurodiverse challenges, but also people, friends, colleagues would also be very interested. And the other group would be professionals in the field to understand real lived experience. What I hope people will get out of it is like a deeper insight into mental illness and neurodiversity, a deeper understanding that it's not a failing, it's not a weakness, but also the key thing is inspiration and hope. So inspiration that, we can do something about it if we seek proper professional help, and the hope that, yes, things may be tough, but it is possible for things to improve. So I think the two key things would be inspiration and hope.
Yes, and thank you again so much for the work that you look forward to doing, with the book and also in the community, donating to charities. As much as there's a tremendous amount of wealth in this world, right? We still see the lack of support in the mental health field. This is something that, as a society, me personally, if I was the president of the world, right, mental health will be my number one top priority, because I think the more sound we are in the mind, right, the better function we are in society. So it's ironic, but also interesting that, the political systems, right, all over the world, not just in the UK or US, but all over the world, neglect this part of ourselves as much as we do in our society. If we want to connect with you on social media or any other platform that you have, how can we connect with you?
Yeah, by all means. So I'm having an author website built, which will be jonathankemp.com. But you'll also be able to link with me on LinkedIn and Facebook. Again, Jonathan Kemp. And if you find difficulty finding me, if you just put Jonathan Kemp London, that should bring you up. And both on Instagram and Facebook and possibly LinkedIn, I will also keep like a daily record of this short 7-month walk I'm going to be doing.
Oh, that's exciting. Again, thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us on Self Reflection Podcast. Thank you for sharing your journey with us in this moment. I appreciate the insight that you brought on Self Reflection Podcast, especially when it came down to bipolar. I thought that was really insightful, and I hope that anyone that is going through that struggle will, and they listen to this conversation, will find some value in it. Any final words for somebody that might be facing a difficult moment when it comes down to the mental health?
It comes back to what you're asking. I was hoping people get out of the book. And what I would say is there is hope. And it doesn't have to be this way. And if you feel that you've got nowhere else to turn to, that's not necessarily a negative, in that could be the one driver to finally help you seek the proper, correct professional medical help.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining us on Self Reflection Podcast. I appreciate every single one of you tuning in. Again, before we head out, I want to remind you, if you have yet to hit that subscription button on Self Reflection Podcast, please go ahead and do so. Right? Let's continue to grow this community. Let's continue to bring awareness to mental health, to the struggles that we experience every day, and also build a community where we don't feel alone. Right, as we're having a conversation today, one of the things we talk about was that inner critic. And for as many conversations I have had, over 100 and close to 200 conversations I've had with different people, one of them, the key topic that comes on every time is that inner critic with every single one of them. So please go ahead and subscribe if you haven't. Subscribe to this platform and share this conversation with somebody that you know that might benefit them. I hope that you guys have a blessed day. Take care of yourself, love yourself, be kind, and be gentle with yourself. Until next time, you're listening to Self Reflection Podcast, and this is your girl, Lira. Ta-da!